You mentioned being part of this second wave Caribbean feminism and being involved in activism. Do you feel that the activism back then is still alive as much today?
I might be more singular in this view, and I oftentimes feel that I am, but I think that activism cannot be contrived. I think activism comes out of people's serious relationship to reality and the way in which they feel the need for activism. If there was a certain kind of activism in the 70s, both a socialist and a feminist activism, the need then for how we were activists, the whole emergence of the second wave movement and the way we latched on to international and global currents as part of a movement was very much part of a new air that we breathe. That has changed. I don't think things remain the same. I think every generation receives from the last generation and then begins to feel a sense of almost complacency. You know, you've won that. Yes. So what is this struggle about? What are these women about? But then you begin to feel the pinch. One of the things I feel that the younger generation, like yourself, have to deal with now is how do you manage some concepts of equality or some ideas of equality? How do you manage the idea that sexual freedoms are much more available in what you wear and how you dance and so on, and what is on television and the screen? But how do you manage that equality in terms of having others, especially men, understand that to see is not to touch? You know, how do you manage equality where if you sit in the boardroom, then you are not the one who is supposed to get up and get the coffee? You know, how do you manage the levels of equality that have now been almost inherited? And how do you see the places that are still necessary to have activism? And I think what we have now is a mushrooming of those spaces. So instead of having a small, confined, non-governmental organization called a free assented sharing feminist activist organization, you have many. You have things like the Hindu Women's Organization. Yesterday I went to the Diwali celebrations where they introduced the new president who is taking over after 25 years of existence. So you have something like a Hindu Women's Organization which brings together all Hindu in one organization, which didn't exist before 25 years ago. You have a whole spate of national machineries that operate, you know, whether they are the government gender affairs or all their related projects. You have the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, which has its own projects. You have associations like Aspire, the association which is examining the rights for abortion. You have many other church and other groups that may not come out militantly as, yes, we are feminists, but what they are informed by is a concept of equality and equity. And I think if you were to document all of these spaces, if you were to document all of these activities, and you were to look at the kernel, really study them, you would see that what you have is a much greater activist movement than is conceived. The idea of looking at activism only as something in which people espouse a certain belief, I don't agree with that. Because if we did that, then we would look in the past and see all those women who appeared to be burdened and who weren't in their own households actively fighting against certain constraints, were not feminists. I think definitions keep changing. Our definitions of feminism can't remain the same. And how these definitions of feminism keep changing must rest with the new generation or with coming generations to in fact change those definitions. My generation can't define it for another generation.
For future students and for students that we have now and future researchers of the IGDS, thoughts and advice would you leave with them?
I would like to see that the students who come to do gender studies now do not come here again because they think it's an easy option, because we all know that gender studies is in fact not an easy option. It is the more difficult option. We are testing not your academic capacity but your ethical and other capacities, your commitment to society, your commitment to nation, your commitment to global awareness of gender equity. So first of all, I think we want students who are willing to engage in that and willing to be committed. The second thing is I think we want students who are willing to work at their academia. I don't think there's a shortcut to any academic work. I think it requires diligence, hard work. Mental labor is as arduous as manual labor. I don't diminish either one. But mental labor requires that kind of commitment that comes with wanting to understand the thing you're dealing with and not pandering to cliches and platitudes, which we are too given to, including too given to dismissing what other people have done before. I think I want students who will look at what we've done critically, as say for instance my student Tonya Haynes, a PhD student who just completed her PhD in Cave, has done, and just look at what we've done as knowledge and critique it and move it forward and say these were the gaps and this is what we hadn't thought about. I want students who will not do the easy thing, which is to say, okay, well, women are not reaching the glass ceiling. This is what comes across in the media, and I want to study that. I want them to come with new questions. I want them to come and ask the questions, look for the questions that have not been asked, and that they are not maybe looking for themselves. I want them to come with newness and to surprise us all the time, to surprise us with their scholarship.
Okay, this is my last question, and I think a sort of personal one. Out of all the work that you've done, of all your written work, all your films, does anything stand out to you the most, maybe as your favorite?
I think every body of work I do, I get obsessed about it at the time, and when I move on, the obsession moves to something else. So, I have so many favorites. My last favorite, I suspect, has to be film, because, and we hadn't talked about moving from visuality naturally into filmmaking, because filmmaking for me represented the moment of becoming the artist again, the artist that I wanted to be, now with the new technologies available to me. And as I've said many times, for me the screen is a big canvas that I want to paint on. But Coolie Pink and Green remains my favorite film for a specific reason, for gender, because it is the voice of a young woman, and it's the voice of a young woman who's defined centuries of tradition in the way in which she's approaching life, with an openness and a willingness to, to question and to take on the old and to move with it. The other reason my favorite is because I wanted to create a vision of beauty that I think eludes people in culture. And I don't mean beauty only in Indian culture. I wanted to deal with the question of aesthetics, because one of the problems, one of the theoretical problems, and one of the political problems that confronted us and that we were left as a legacy coming out of colonialism, coming out of periods of migration and loss, both Africans, Indians, and other groups, is that we saw each other through the lens with which the colonial authorities saw us. And I felt that what we needed to do was to strip those lenses and to look with new eyes. And for me, Coolie Pink and Green, and the films that I did before, The Color of Darkness, which is on Rastafari in Jamaica, or The Sign of the Law, which is on Voodoo in Haiti, all of those films have begun to say, look at this as your new creativity. Look at the way in which we have come out of all of this, as all societies have their histories. And when you can see that beauty, when you can see that vision, when you can see yourselves as having created originality and beauty that you recognize, then you have gained sovereignty. Then you have achieved something. For me, that is where my last statement is in my scholarship, and I'm now moving that ahead with another project, which I won't speak about now, but perhaps you'll invite me back to talk about that and what we haven't addressed maybe in some of the issues that we discussed before.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Professor Mohammed, for being here and being part of our conversation series. And we really would like to learn a lot more and hope that you could come back for a second interview.
Thank you, Anusha.